So shifting gears to the to what men do in response to the wounding, what do you notice men doing to not feel the pain?
Well, drinking is a classic favorite. uh, there's all kinds addictions. That I once had a client who had been a heroin addict, alcoholic, speed freak, and porn addict, but he was clean and sober from all of them, which is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beating the odds four times. And I once said to him, "Well, addictions sort of work." And he went, "Bob, you're so full of shit. You just insulted every addict. Addictions don't sort of work. They really work. That's why we do them. We're not idiots. If you're in terrible pain and flooded with shame, you get half drunk, you feel better. It works. It works right away." And and then he said, "You need to recognize that or you're never going to understand addictions." And then he said, "The problem is it's a dead end street. You go down there, it works less and less, and the collateral damage is greater and greater. So it works at the get go, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and totally destroys you." And that was a big turning point for me because I had been disrespecting addicts. It really does work at the start, but then it makes everything so much worse.
Hmm.
So addictions are a really favorite way
Yeah.
of not dealing with it.
Are there more subtle ways that men don't deal with it? That don't deal with the pain?
All kinds of stuff. It not overachieving, becoming an athlete, overtraining, working 80 hours a week at some law firm. That'll keep your emotions dead. You know? There's all kinds of behaviors that'll do that. Um, there's spiritual bypass. That's a favorite. Meditate until you don't have any feelings at all. And then you can look down your long bony nose at everybody else who's down there in the muck. Am I being too snotty, Pete?
Not at all. No, not at all. No, I mean, I think that there's a thousands of ways that men can distance themselves, and I think they often feel like they cut both ways. If you overwork yourself at a large law firm, you make lots of money, and people respect you and think you've got full happiness, but that's exactly the opposite
Yeah.
of what that's going to look like.
Yep. And it's socially approved.
Um, when you when you are in a room with a man, um, what when you're sitting with a man who's experienced deep pain, what qualities do you hold?
Number one, curiosity. And this one's going to sound weird. Number two, ignorance.
Mm.
Even though I've been doing this for 50 years, I don't assume I know. And that's really important. I am not an expert, I'm a beginner. That man or that woman, whoever is sitting in front of me, if I spent the rest of my life, or if I lived 200 years and focused all my attention on that person, they would still ultimately be a mystery to me. I could never fathom them. So to think I can put some label like manic depressive or some garbage like that on them and it has any meaning at all is ridiculously arrogant. So when I'm sitting with someone, I am their student. I want to learn about them and their reality and how they feel they're put together. And I'm really, really curious. Often I find people absolutely fascinating. Even I've been doing this 50 years now. And people get more fascinating, not less. And I think the people who get burnt out, the problem's not their client load or anything like that. It's a curiosity failing in the person, in the therapist. They lose their curiosity about other people. You will never completely know another person.
Mm. And how do men respond to this sort of? I mean, it's in I guess maybe Carl Rogers might agree with this, but there's many approaches now that are, how do we change them? How do we make them better? How do we, give them tools
Yep.
and
Yep.
techniques? But you're talking about something that's completely different than that, that it's a stance and it's a feeling. How do men respond to that?
Yep. Usually really well, but um, let me talk about it this way. I think there are two basic kinds of change: counteractive change and generative change. Let's call them. Counteract CBT, this thing where you give somebody this little mental trick or hack they can do to get through the difficult situation a little better. That would be putting a bandage on a wound. It's like somebody who thinks they're ugly and stupid. You have the person go, I'm good looking and intelligent. I'm good looking and repeat that, forever and ever. That'll work. The person will start feeling a little better about themselves, but you have to keep doing it forever. And it doesn't really get to the deep parts in there who came up with that belief about being ugly and stupid. That's counteractive change. That's what CBT, DBT, all those kinds of therapies are based on. And it works. And for some people, that's what they need. They need a Band-Aid so they can go back there and do their lives. Especially for people 40 and more, that's not enough anymore. And what they need is generative change, something that'll really change who they are at a deep level. William James, in his great, difficult, and magnificent book, but it's not an easy read, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he said there are two kinds of religion or deep spiritual experience available to humans. He called one the healthy-minded. That would be this, we'll just put a Band-Aid on it, everything's fine, positive thinking, saying affirmations, all that kind of stuff. That's the healthy mind. And then there's the sick-souled. That's people who've really, really been hurt. They've visited hell, and they need something that will completely turn them around, completely change their way of being. And I think all trauma survivors are in this second category. And this is sort of the AA approach too. God comes through the wound, not by ignoring the wound, not by putting a Band-Aid. A really good example of generative change comes from some of the psychedelic work done by MAPS. They did these cohorts with people. They'd give them MDMA, 3 MDMA sessions interposed with, I think it was 12 therapy sessions. And that was the whole treatment protocol. And these were PTSD people. After the treatment protocol, 52% of the people no longer scored as having PTSD at all, which is way, way, way better than any other treatment was getting. But the amazing thing, the evidence of real generative change is, a year later, 68%, not 52, 68% no longer scored as having any PTSD at all. And there was no further therapy in that intervening year. A seed had been planted. A tree was growing. That's a totally different thing than CBT or this Band-Aid healthy-minded approach. I think that's what we need more of, especially people who've been really hurt.
Yes. So we've talked a lot about a model, I think about internal family systems is used in the therapy room, but that individual therapy or even group therapy is one path. And you've spoken and written about spirituality and other dimensions of healing. Where have you seen men heal when no therapist was present?
Lots of places. There's a whole sort of mythopoetic tradition of healing. And I think the early men's group with Robert Bly and Mead, what was his name? Michael Mead, I think. James Hillman contributed a lot too. They would use poetry and a lot of other stuff. A lot of the deep myths can guide us in really, really wonderful ways. I think the therapy framework, considering this as an issue of mental illness, is way too limiting and small. You know, the whole idea of mental illness is a Western cultural construct. And I also have some graduate work in anthropology. Many anthropologists will not use the phrase mental illness when discussing other cultures because it imposes all of our categories on the other culture. They use the phrase the idiom of distress. If we hold many of these issues that or traumas that come to us as something that's potentially spiritually meaningful and can open our way into a deep kind of profound connection with spirit and who we are, that changes everything. And I think it's a more appropriate framework to take.
Have you seen specific models or examples of things that are outside the box, outside of that one-on-one or group therapy?
Mm-hmm. Psychedelic therapy. I started, I had my first acid trip in 1967. So I've been at this a while. And I was headed toward severe addiction coming out of my family. Boy, I just wanted to get drunk first thing in the morning. Beer, it's not just for breakfast anymore, you know, and stay that way. And I didn't care about anything. But somehow doing a lot of acid, alcohol lost its kind of magnetic grab on me. There were times in later life when I abused alcohol, but it was never with that overwhelming addictive drive of just get me out of here. I don't care what it costs tomorrow. You know, that was gone because I'd seen the possibility of worlds where there was meaning and light and purpose. So I think psychedelic healing is incredibly valuable. And I want to say some things that'll piss off some more people now. just to fulfill my reputation.
Why not?
I think the way therapists are dealing with psychedelics is truly unfortunate. I'm so happy that it's getting legalized and therapists are using it. And I was on the board of directors, board of advisors for Mind Medicine Australia for 8-10 years. And in Australia, we got psilocybin and MDMA legalized for administration by therapists. You know, hallelujah, yay, 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 finally, finally. But, and it's a huge but, the average psychedelic session that's legal and supervised by therapists costs about $19,000 Australian. Because there's so many requirements, psychiatrists, all these extra interviews, it's ridiculous. So the vast majority of psychedelic sessions will still be done, friend sitting with friend, completely untrained, no helpful therapeutic support, and just relying on the native healing intelligence within the person. And I think that's terrible. And all the money is going into these tiny little 1 or 2% are going to be able to afford these therapist-assisted psychedelic sessions. The vast majority, it's going to be friend with friend. So I've been trying to produce some online stuff in the idea of harm prevention to give people some sound basic ideas about how to work with psychedelics in a way that will maximize the healing potential. So that's one thing I think is a really important way. I also think that this whole, back in the earlier men's group, they talked about mythopoetic healing, and I think that's really true. There's a lot of healing in poems and in literature, in the ancient myths. We can access depths of psyche, and those things can move and change and shift in us.
I'm I'm intrigued about the other modalities that therapists haven't really touched, and I'm intrigued with the psychedelics. Do you have a sense if that's something that is more attractive to men than women, and if so, how might that be?
That's a great question. Back in the 60s, in the first psychedelic wave, definitely it was more men than women. And I think the women now are trying to rewrite that history and talking about the mothers of the psychedelic revolution. I don't think that was true. I think it was primarily male thing. At the University of Chicago, the people who were doing a lot of acid were overwhelmingly men. that I can say with a reasonable assurance. And I've stayed involved with this. And actually, I've gotten arrested twice over the years, so I've paid some dues for my involvement here and my belief in this as a healing modality. In the psychedelic renaissance, all these people, in the past decade who are doing a lot of psychedelics, women are much, much, much more prominent, at least half, maybe more than half. So, and I have no statistics. But that's a seat of the pants opinion from somebody who's been actively involved in this for more than 50 years.
And what is it about? I mean, I'm very curious about psychedelics, but what is it about that process that seems to and it seems to marry well with internal family systems?
Well, I think what happens in psychedelics is very powerful evidence that confirms two of the basic ideas of IFS. We're made up of parts. We're not one unified milkshake. We're all these different parts. We're like a sports team or an orchestra or something. That gets really, really obvious in many, many psychedelic journeys. Also, this idea that we have a self, that also gets really obvious. I'm also a student of Emanuel Swedenborg's, who was this guy who died 250 years ago, who was a very, very prominent scientist. And then about the age of 50, he started talking to demons and angels. And he spent the last 30 years of his life talking to demons and angels. And he wrote a 30-volume geography of heaven and hell. And he was a scientist. He was copper mining and designing military stuff, hard-nosed scientist. So he kept that kind of attitude. What he said, there's a place, he called it the place of inflow, where the divine flows into us. And he describes it very, very much like IFS describes self. And I think a lot of people who take psychedelics come in contact with this. And it can be absolutely life-changing. Oh my Lord, look what's deep down inside my core. I was too terrified to even look. And there's this place where light and love and wisdom are just flowing into me, and I've been ignoring it. So opening up to that reality of self or the place of inflow, and knowing that we have all these parts who sort of take us over and drive the bus for short periods of time. I think those are very important things. Some of the psychedelics, specifically MDMA, famously, increase compassion levels. And many, many people cannot meet their parts because they don't have compassion for them. So the parts hide from them. And it can be hard to have compassion for some little kid who's just screaming in terror. That's hard to sit with in a loving way. But with the MDMA on board, a lot of people can do that much better. There's a very famous case from the Mithoffers, the people who did all the MAP studies on MDMA. They worked a lot with Army veterans. And this guy from Iraq was there, and he took several MDMA sessions, and he met this part with the MDMA deep down inside himself, and he saw the part being in a jail cell, in a cage, and the part was just full of rage and hate. I'm going to kill everybody. I can't kill those Iraqis anymore. I'm going to go out in the street and kill some son of a bitch, or and he was having big anger problems. With the increased compassion from the MDMA, he was able to go down to that part in the cage, open the cage door, welcome that raging part out, and hug it.
Hmm.
And he started crying, and the raging part was able to release its rage, and it was a beginning of real healing, where he was no longer tormented by hate, rage, and these extreme startle responses. So in that case, there's this flood of compassion, which makes a deeper level of healing possible.
Yeah. Are you familiar with it sounds like that there's been some both research and trials using for patients with cancer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they do. There's a great deal with end of life fears.
Yeah, because those are, I can't imagine much fears bigger than that the end is with us.
Yeah. Yeah. The guy who did that is Roland Griffiths. He's dead now. He got cancer and died himself. Sadly, I think he was a real giant. He was such a rigorous statistician. But he got really curious. What's doing the healing here? What's doing the healing? So, and he had this idea, maybe it's this sort of mystical experience of that place of inflow or self or whatever we're going to call it. So he did something that I find it humorous. He operationalized a definition of mystical experiences. He got a numerical score to measure how profound a mystical experience people had. And he had 3 major characteristics, 4 minor, and it was weighted and all statistically done. But what happened, it was really clear that the more powerful the mystical experience, the greater the healing the person experienced. So there was a clear statistical relationship between these two. So, and I think, this is sort of laboratory evidence that a spiritual connection heals people. And because I've worked all over the world, it doesn't matter if it's Christian, Buddhist, atheist. My wife's Korean, as I mentioned. There's a 4,000 or 5,000 year old Korean shamanic tradition. And they have very profound ways of contacting spirit. Doesn't matter. All that stuff doesn't matter. What flavor it is. I'm not trying to say to anybody, oh, you got, just this one path.
I want to shift some gears to my last questions. What question about men are you still living with?
Oh, all sorts. I mean, I think I'm going to back up a little bit to get a running start at this question. Yeah. I think our entire understanding of the history of the Western intellectual world is wrong. It's biased. It's very narrow and wrong. And this is especially true about Socrates and Plato. We totally misunderstand them. Now, Socrates is, Plato, Whitehead famously said, all Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato. But you can't and most people see him as the founder of Western rationality, the origin of our rational, wonderful worldview. Well, Plato said very clearly there are 4 types of mania that are better sources of knowledge than any rational discourse. But the best mania of all for Plato was erotic mania. That is the surest source of knowledge. This guy was not some dry rationalist. He was a mystic full of life. And Socrates, the great teacher of Plato, who all the Platonic dialogues are dialogues with Socrates in them, pretty much, his number one value was aporia, sometimes pronounced aporia. And the Oracle of Delphi said, oh, Socrates is the wisest man in Greece. And somebody came and told him that, and he thought, oh, that's ridiculous. But then he went around Greece and talked to all the other people who were supposed to be wise. And when he came back to Athens, he said, oh, I know why the oracle thinks I'm the wisest man, because I know I don't know anything. They all think they know stuff. So, and this is what he did in the dialogues. He would ask people these questions about their beliefs until he reduced them to a state of realizing their beliefs were sort of ridiculous, actually, and very limiting. He would reduce them to aporia, and he said, aporia is the doorway to knowing. And that guy, the Sadhguru, I think put it in a good way. He said, there is only one portal to knowing, to knowledge, and that is, I do not know. So coming from that point of view of aporia, of not knowing, there is so much I don't know about men. Men in general, and any one particular man sitting in front of me. And I've come to enjoy that. I no longer feel this thing like I want to be some big shot expert. It's much more fun, more exciting, and more interesting to be a beginner and to have this feeling of delight and excitement at all the learning that's possible.
One last question. What do you feel most hopeful about men?
What makes me feel most hopeful? Well, it's more universal than just men. I think sort of dark forces actually rule our planet. They rule our governments, they rule our media, they rule most of the churches, most of the educational institutions, all that. It's all fairly horribly corrupted. And yet, I'm fundamentally optimistic about men and about the future of our species. And this is why. I think the only way people change deeply is to do this kind of deeper work, the transformational kind of change, the kind of the sick-souled, as William James called it. And the only way that happens is one-on-one or small groups, a few people at a time, and it's slow and loving and kind. But so the reason why I'm optimistic, saying those things that sound so negative, something Ian McGilchrist said. He said, we don't need to change 50% or 51%. We only need to change about 2 or 3% of the people on the planet. Because a healthy state is so contagious in the best possible way. And it sends out ripples to everyone a healthy person comes in contact with. That if 2 or 3% of the people on the planet could get some substantial healing, that would be enough to tip the balance and turn everything in another direction. So that gives me the optimism and the courage to keep working one-on-one with people, slow and steady. And maybe this is special pleading because this is the kind of work I know how to do, and I want to feel it's worthwhile. But I also think this is true. And I don't know, 70 years ago, Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said something I really liked. She said, never doubt that a small group of people can change the course of a culture. It's the only thing that ever has. So one-on-one, small group healing in a loving, compassionate, supportive way, I think will turn the balance.
Perfect way to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Bob, for joining Man Parts. I've appreciated you. Could you, where can folks find you? And I don't know if you want to say anything about your upcoming book or the documentary that you're in.
Okay. RobertFalconer.us. Robert Falconer, all one word, .us is my website. I have like 10 books that I've written. Probably the most important one, or the one that has raised the most sand, is The Others Within Us, which is actually about what used to be called spirit possession. But there's a book of quotes, if you like quotes, called When You're Going Through Hell, Keep Going. And the one that's coming out now, Self Unbroken, is a detailed account of my early recovery from my childhood, which has a lot of details of sadistic childhood sexual abuse. It's not for everyone. It's a difficult read, but for some people, I think it can be very transformational. This is a second edition, and that's why I put it out again.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate you, and maybe we can have you back on the podcast.
Okay, great being here. Good talking to you, Pete. Take care.
Thanks.